Before I tell you this story, I want you to picture the Great Smoky Mountains as they existed in 1872. Not the national park that millions of tourists visit today. Not the scenic overlooks, paved roads, or marked hiking trails. Back then, the Smokies were a vast wilderness stretching across Tennessee and North Carolina, covered by dense forests so thick that sunlight rarely touched the ground. Entire valleys remained unmapped. Some ridges had never been crossed by outsiders. Settlers living near the mountains often spoke of strange places hidden deep within the fog-covered wilderness, places where hunters disappeared, where compasses failed, and where sounds echoed through the trees without any visible source. Most educated people laughed at those stories. They called them mountain folklore, campfire tales, superstitions invented by isolated communities. But in the autumn of 1872, a small expedition entered one of the least explored sections of the Smoky Mountains and encountered something that would leave behind a mystery still discussed by researchers more than a century later. The journey began with a businessman named Thomas Whitmore. Whitmore had made a fortune in logging operations and believed the Smokies contained enormous untapped resources. Vast forests of valuable timber stretched across the region, and rumors persisted that rich mineral deposits existed beneath the mountains. If those resources could be located and mapped, Whitmore stood to become even wealthier. To accomplish this, he organized a private surveying expedition. 7 men were selected. The leader was Samuel Carter, a respected surveyor known for his experience in difficult terrain. Alongside him were 6 other men, including hunters, guides, and woodsmen who had spent years navigating dangerous wilderness. These were not inexperienced adventurers chasing legends. They were practical men accustomed to hardship. On September 11, 1872, the group departed from a small settlement near the Tennessee border. Residents watched them disappear into the mountains with pack horses loaded with supplies. No one considered the departure unusual. Expeditions entered the Smokies regularly. Most returned within a few weeks. The first several days passed without incident. The men followed narrow game trails, crossed rivers, and documented terrain that had never appeared on official maps. Each evening, Samuel Carter recorded observations in a leather-bound journal that would later become the primary source of information about what happened. His early entries were routine. Descriptions of weather, terrain conditions, wildlife sightings. Nothing suggested the nightmare that was about to unfold. The first strange occurrence was recorded on the 8th night. According to Carter's journal, the expedition had established camp near a remote valley surrounded by steep ridges. Shortly after sunset, one of the men reported hearing voices in the distance. At first, nobody paid much attention. The mountains carried sound for incredible distances. Another group of hunters might have been camping nearby. But as darkness settled across the valley, everyone heard them. The voices seemed human. Yet there was something deeply unsettling about them. No individual words could be distinguished. Instead, the sounds resembled dozens of conversations happening simultaneously. Whispers overlapping one another. Murmurs rising and falling in strange rhythms. The voices continued for nearly an hour before abruptly stopping. The following night they returned. And the night after that. Always after sunset. Always coming from somewhere deeper within the mountains. Several members of the expedition attempted to locate their source. Armed with lanterns and rifles, they followed the sounds into the forest. Each time the same thing happened. The voices would continue until the men approached a certain area. Then they would suddenly vanish. Not fade away. Not grow distant. Simply stop. As though someone had blown out a candle. The explorers searched for campsites, footprints, or any evidence of human presence. They found nothing. Samuel Carter initially suspected a natural explanation. Perhaps unusual echoes created by the geography of the valley. Perhaps distant settlers whose voices were being distorted by atmospheric conditions. But even he admitted the phenomenon was difficult to explain. 3 days later, the expedition entered a region that appeared on none of their maps. The valley was unlike anything they had encountered before. A dense layer of fog covered the ground despite warm afternoon temperatures. The air felt unusually cold. Trees grew in twisted formations, their branches bending in unnatural directions. Several trunks appeared blackened as though burned by fire, yet showed no actual signs of damage. One member of the expedition later described the area in a recovered journal fragment. He wrote that stepping into the valley felt like entering another world. The forest seemed unnaturally quiet. No birds, no insects, no sounds except the movement of the men themselves. Even experienced hunters noticed something was wrong. Wildlife avoided the valley entirely. Not a single deer track could be found. No bear signs. No animal droppings. Nothing. It was as if every living creature instinctively stayed away. That evening the men established camp near the center of the valley. As darkness approached, several explorers argued that they should leave immediately. Others insisted on staying. After all, they had traveled hundreds of miles to survey unexplored territory. Leaving without completing their work would mean failure. The decision was made to remain one more night. It was a choice that would haunt them forever. Around midnight, one of the men shouted and awakened the entire camp. He claimed he had seen lights moving between the trees. The others grabbed rifles and rushed outside. At first they saw nothing. Then, through the fog, tiny pale glows appeared in the distance. The lights drifted silently among the trees. Not lanterns, not campfires, not reflections. Small floating points of illumination moving with deliberate purpose. The men watched in stunned silence. One explorer fired a warning shot into the darkness. The lights vanished instantly. Seconds later, the voices returned. But this time they were closer. Much closer. Instead of distant murmurs echoing through the mountains, the sounds seemed to originate just beyond the edge of the campfire's light. Several men later claimed they could hear individual words. The problem was that none of the words belonged to any language they recognized. The voices continued until dawn. Nobody slept. As the first sunlight filtered through the fog, the exhausted explorers prepared breakfast and discussed abandoning the expedition. One of the 7 men was missing. His tent remained exactly as he had left it. His rifle was still inside. His boots sat beside his bedroll. But the man himself had vanished. There were no signs of a struggle. No footprints leading away from camp. No blood. No torn clothing. Nothing. It was as though he had simply ceased to exist. And that was only the beginning. The disappearance of the first man changed everything. Samuel Carter and the remaining explorers searched the forest for hours, but there were no footprints, no signs of a struggle, and no clue where he had gone. His rifle and supplies were still in camp. Terrified, Carter ordered the expedition to turn back immediately. As they attempted to leave the valley, the men realized something was terribly wrong. Familiar landmarks had vanished, streams appeared where none had been before, and their compasses spun wildly. It felt as if the mountains themselves were changing around them. That night, strange voices returned from the darkness. Some men swore they heard their own names whispered from the trees. The next morning, another explorer was missing. Panic took over. The survivors pushed deeper into the wilderness, desperately searching for a way out. Then pale lights began appearing among the fog-covered trees, silently watching them from a distance. Carter's final journal entry read, "The voices are close now. We see figures in the fog. If anyone finds this journal, do not come looking for us." Those were the last words ever recorded. Months later, search parties found abandoned equipment, but no trace of the men. To this day, nobody knows what happened to the 1872 Smoky Mountains expedition, or why records of it seemed to disappear. And whatever it was, none of them ever escaped it.